Knight Episode 5 is a truly profound experience that shows us the fragility of the human mind and the effects trauma plays in our lives through fantastic storytelling and beautiful visuals. Plus, there's Lady Hippopotamus God.
Hippopotamus. Ow!
Hi. This episode is pretty heavy and there is a lot to process, so jump aboard my ship as I guide you through the plane of Easter eggs, where we balance the scales with things you missed. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell because we have only 2 episodes left and you don't want to miss our breakdown and theory videos. Now, let's jump right in. I'm Monty with the Montyverse, and this is my breakdown of Moon Knight Episode 5, The Asylum. The standard fanfare is back, but this episode is far from standard MCU, as we open on a dark cave with Mark's mother telling him it was all his fault, which sets up that this episode will give us many glimpses into Mark's tragic past as the perspective jumps from here to Mark and Steven, and then to Mark alone in Dr. Harrow's office. I'm going to talk about the Jeff Lemire comic a lot in this breakdown because it borrows extremely heavily from it. The Putnam Medical Facility, which is where Dr. Harrow says they are, is ripped directly from that comic. So is the idea that Mark has been in this asylum for a period of time and that his entire life as Moon Knight was some made-up fantasy to protect his mind from the trauma that he experienced. The look of Mark with a bloody broken nose is also taken directly from that comic book. While it makes sense for Harrow to be the psychologist here as Ammit was the doctor in the comic, it also makes sense for Mark to perceive him in this role because every interaction he had with Arthur Harrow, Arthur was trying to psychoanalyze Mark and Steven and trying to understand why he was not able to completely judge them in the beginning of the series. He has a way with words that makes you question yourself and makes you really get in your own head. Harrow tells Mark,
"This hippo could break down the walls between you and Steven, and we might finally understand."
This more or less ends up happening, as through Tarowit's guidance, they're able to break down the wall between the two of them and essentially become whole? But more on that later. Harrow brings up the organizing principle, a term that can be applied to life as well as psychology. In this case, it essentially means it is the practice of the mind to take complex ideas and phenomena and explain them in a way that is understandable. This is something we all do. Mark has a particularly fragile mind, so the implication here is that he uses his fantasies to cope with his past trauma. But this also shows how he is using the psych ward to process his past, current events, and potential death. However, Tarowit later states that Mark is envisioning a psych ward because the Duat's true form is impossible for the human mind to comprehend. Both are essentially using the same reasoning to justify what is going on in both scenarios. Mark resists the reality Harrow is selling, and we jump back to where last episode ended. I love the jumps throughout this episode, as we are constantly weaving between flashbacks, what we think is reality, and the doctor's office. It represents the confusion of a broken mind, while also helping us to better understand both Mark and Steven. Tarowit informs Mark that he is dead, and that he is in the realm of the Duat. The Duat is the realm of the dead in ancient Egyptian mythology. However, it is not the final step, but more like a complex journey where the dead are tested and finally judged. Tarowit is the goddess of fertility and childbirth, but it is believed that she also facilitated the afterlives of the dead, with her appearance here being foreshadowed all the way back in episode 1.
Bring those hippos up here, will you?
Yeah, sure. Tarwetic. The hippo. Goddess Tarwetic.
Tarowit essentially explains that the MCU has multiple versions of an afterlife, and mentions the ancestral plane from Black Panther. This is a pretty cool idea. I mean, there are a number of different gods that exist in the MCU, each with their own afterlife, such as the Asgardians and Valhalla. So a statement like this leaves all of these possible without pigeonholing the MCU into a specific answer. Mark is truly starting to believe that the hospital is the reality and Moon Knight is fake, because deep down Mark knows that he is not mentally well and needs help. This is why the events of this episode and last week are set in a mental health facility. It is the easiest way for Mark to perceive what is going on. However, Mark opens a door and reveals a better look at the Duat, a sprawling landscape that is covered in sand being navigated by a boat. The ancient Egyptians believed strongly that the afterlife would carry many realistic geographical points while also having many fantastical elements, which is why we have a river of sand under a purple sky. You have the sand and a river form that is something that exists in our world, but you have this magical purple sky that kind of lets you know that you're not exactly on the mortal plane anymore. What they are riding on is an Egyptian funerary boat that was very important in ancient Egyptian religion. It symbolized the transport of one's soul to the afterlife. A smaller version of this boat can be seen in episode 2 in Steven's fish tank. Tarouette pulls out Mark and Steven's hearts and places them on a scale weighed against a feather. This is common practice for the ancient Egyptians, as they believed that after journeying through the Duat, their hearts would be judged by the god Anubis against a feather of Ma'at, which is the Egyptian concept of truth and justice, usually represented through an ostrich feather. Souls that are balanced go to the afterlife, and rotten souls would be fed to Ammet. While we do see the scale, Anubis is nowhere to be found. While his likeness is present on the scale, it is very possible he is one of the many gods trapped in the wall we saw last episode. It may also explain why Tarouette is performing all of the godly duties on their journey, and there are no other gods around. The two hearts of Mark and Steven make the scale behave weirdly, and Tarouette tells them that the two hearts are half full. Remember this because we are coming back to that later on. They are told to explore the boat, relive their past, and open up to each other. They walk by doors, one with the jackal fight from episode 1, another with the stars changing from episode 3, and we also pass by a door that I believed belonged to Jack Lockley at first, but later on we find out it belongs to Mark. This door has a barcode, and just like the other episodes, if you scan it, you are given a free Moon Knight comic. This barcode giving you Moon Knight #1 from the 1980s. It is a monumental issue in his story because it features the first ever telling of Moon Knight's origin story. Just like this episode gives us Moon Knight's origin for the first time told in the MCU. They hear a young boy and enter a cafeteria filled with dead bodies. Mark recognizes them all, and he states these are the worst of the worst, the ones Khonshu wanted punished. These are the people he killed as Moon Knight, and he remembers every single one. They then see a young boy, and Steven chases after him as he runs away. This brings us to Mark's childhood as we meet his mom, dad, and younger brother Roro. And I'm presuming that Roro is short for Randall because his brother's name in the comics is Randall Spector. If you look closer, you can see that Roro is drawing a picture of a fish with one fin, just like Gus. Before going out to venture in some caves like young boys do, Mark says,
"Laters, gators, wild crocodile."
A reference to what Steven says to his mother in episode 1.
Laters, gators.
The two brothers are pretending to be Dr. Stephen Grant and Rasa, who we saw last episode in the Tombbuster VHS. Steven steps on a hummingbird skeleton that looks identical to Khonshu's skull. In the comics, we learn that Khonshu targeted Mark at a young age due to the fragility of his mind in order to eventually drive him mad and take over his body. But I don't believe the MCU Khonshu has that intention, as he seems pretty determined to stop Ammit, and he had avatars before Mark, so I don't realistically think that he's been following him from a young age. But who knows, Khonshu could have done all this, and the show could get even darker next episode. But for right now, I'm assuming he didn't. We see the cave fill with water, and we learn that Mark's brother died, a memory that haunts Mark. While I do believe Randall is dead in the MCU, it is worth noting that the character has died multiple times in the comics, and he acts as an adversary to Mark using the names the Hatchet Man and Shadow Knight. At the funeral, we see that Mark's mother blames him for his brother's death and never forgives him for it. We see multiple birthdays for Mark that she refuses to celebrate as she drinks her life away, constantly berating her son. This troubles Steven because he remembers their mother completely differently. We see an older Mark leaving home tired of the abuse, most likely setting out to travel the world, learn to box, and join the army, which is accurate to multiple different origin stories in the comics as they see Mark leave his family and cut ties to live his own life. We are then brought to the fateful night in Egypt. We see the infamous dig site that we've been hearing about and the corpse of Layla's father, complete with a Scarlet Scarab scarf and continuing the idea that he was based off of the character, the Scarlet Scarab from the comics. Mark mentions going AWOL in a fugue state, getting him discharged from the military. This is an event that happened the same way in the Lemire comic. Most everything in this scene is taken directly from the backstory of the character we get in those issues. Mark says he turned to work for hire from his old CO, Bushman. This is the first time we hear his name mentioned. Raoul Bushman is a psychotic madman and essentially an arch nemesis to Moon Knight, constantly crossing paths with the hero. In the comic, like in the show, Bushman got greedy and murdered a group of archaeologists. When Marc Spector tried to stop him, he beat Mark and left him for dead. To have him mentioned here opens a world of future story potential for the character. Another thing of note is that Bushman first appeared in Moon Knight #1, which is the free comic barcode we get in this episode. The depiction of Khonshu's tomb is ripped straight from the Lemire comics, as is the statue and even Mark's choice of clothes. This, of course, is the moment. The moment where Khonshu came to a dying Mark and offered him a second chance. Steven tells Mark Khonshu was taking advantage of him, but Mark implies that it was possibly both of them using each other. We then see the birth of a hero, the birth of the Moon Knight. Outside on the boat, we see purple lights hitting the sand, and Tarowet says that people are being judged in mass. Souls are being condemned to the sands before their time. She specifically states that this is wrong and evil. Mark and Steven ask Tarowet to send word to Layla to free Khonshu so that he can heal their body. Tarowet agrees to help and redirects the ship to Osiris's gate. This is the only one that leads back. This is because Osiris is the god of the afterlife, the dead, resurrection, and life, amongst other things. To further attempt to balance the scales, Mark and Steven go back inside. Mark still does not fully confront his past, and he freaks out, being brought back to the office of Dr. Harrow, who convinces Mark to open up to Steven. We are then in Mark's childhood room, and it is heavily inspired by his room in the Jeff Lemire comics, down to the Cubs memorabilia and the poster of Tombbuster, which in the comics is a Raiders of the Lost Ark poster. It is here we see the creation of this Steven Grant persona. Mark created him to help process the physical and mental abuse he suffered at the hands of his mother. Steven was an innocent boy with a normal life and memories of a loving mother. In the comics, Mark also creates the Steven Grant persona at this age to deal with trauma, with Steven starting as an imaginary friend of his. I like the more grounded and realistic approach that they take with Steven's creation here. It is heartbreaking and something that you can imagine happening, so it tears you apart to see a young boy suffer this way. Knowing he grew up in an abusive household with a father who loved him but let it happen, Steven is understandably pissed. We then learn that Mark's mother is dead, and this sends Steven spiraling because he loves his mom and talks to her every day. He now wakes up in the doctor's office and starts roasting Harrow.
The Harrow, yeah? Is it?
That's right.
Oh, yeah, look at that. Wow. Well, you've really gone up in the world, haven't you? Little haircut. Little silly tash there. It's very Ned Flanders.
Boom. Roasted.
Steven is here to process the death of his mother. It is interesting because now we can safely presume that it was Mark keeping up the illusion for Steven in episode 1. He set up the number for him to call, and he was the one sending him postcards. We even see the same postcards in the museum Steven works at. This is because Steven is Mark if he had a normal mother and got to live the life that Mark never could. So Mark kept up the illusion to keep up the Steven Grant persona, a life he is envious of. We are then taken to the Shiva of Mark's mother. Shiva, the Jewish mourning ritual, begins right after the burial and continues for 7 days. During the week of Shiva, friends and relatives visit and comfort the family of the deceased. This is here to emphasize the Jewish heritage of the character, as it is important to his origin in the comics. We have seen Mark wearing a Star of David necklace, and it is nice to see that aspect of his character touched upon even further. Mark is drinking outside the window and refusing to go inside. He is distraught, vulnerable, and utterly shattered, unable to have any sort of closure for his trauma. It is this moment that the Mark and Steven personas begin to bleed into each other, and it happened only 2 months ago, which explains why we also see Mark drinking and sulking in Egypt at the end of episode 2. He's probably still processing all this pain that he's going through. Steven comforts Mark. Both men appear to come to an understanding about it all. They reach the gates of Osiris, but their scale never balanced, so the unclaimed souls of the Duat attacked them. Mark attempts to protect Steven like he always does, but is overwhelmed. Steven steps up and saves Mark. He is sent over the edge and the scales balance. It is interesting to note this bit of foreshadowing all the way in episode 1.
And did it suck for you? Getting rejected from the field of reeds?
Well, that don't make sense, because I'm not dead, am I?
Stevie,
Am I?
I better not be you again.
This episode ends with the scales balancing and Mark in the field of reeds, seemingly in the afterlife without Steven and unable to stop Harrow.
My emotions! My emotions!
I know this one hurts, but let's unpack what happened here. The main goal of Mark this episode was to finally stop running from his past and face it. Him and Steven take a trip down memory lane, and Mark is forced to confront all of the darkness in his life. This time bringing Steven along with him. The reason the scales were in balance is because there were 2 hearts on the scale when there should have only been 1. Steven was a creation of Mark, a creation he used to escape the darkness from his past. As the episode progressed, Steven began to realize everything, and in his moment of heroism, he realizes that him and Mark are the same. While Steven falls, it is almost as if he is becoming dormant and allowing Mark to be whole, because as soon as he is gone, the scales balance and Mark is in the field of reeds. But what happens next? That's a good question. Let's go over some things. First, I honestly do not believe Steven is dead. Stephen is an alt, and a creation of Marc's mind, so there's no way he's gone forever. This does leave the door open for an appearance of Jack Lockley, as he may pop up in Stephen's place at the end of the season, teasing all 3 personas for the future. If Marc is dead, then what happens? I know a lot of people are going to panic because they feel like there are so many dangling threads for next week, but I feel like the stage is actually set for a simple finale. It is very possible Taweret sends word to Layla to free Khonshu, or the other gods of the Ennead may choose to free him after seeing the chaos Harrow and Ammet are wreaking on the world. We do see souls crossing over this episode, and Taweret does go out of her way to note that it is evil what is going on. We know Marc is coming back because we see in some of the trailers a scene where Harrow and Moon Knight are battling on the side of a pyramid with the full moon in the background, meaning that Marc will be at full power. With Marc facing his past and now in control, I believe his Moon Knight will be stronger than ever in the coming battle. Listen, I loved this episode so much. It was a fascinating introspective of our main character and a brilliant way to tell an origin story. I found myself caring for Marc and Stephen in such a powerful way as we journeyed throughout their lives. The way the show is able to convey the abuse Marc suffered was brilliant, as it doesn't linger on it or show too much. It leaves your mind to put the pieces together. Yes, his mother is a physical and verbal abuser, but his father stood by and let her do this to their son. So no matter how much he loved Marc, he was equally as responsible. It really shows you why this character's first instinct is to always run. Not even his home was a home for him. He didn't even feel safe there. I don't know about you guys, but I'm going to need the week to recover from this episode. So join me in 6 days as we break down the finale of Moon Knight. If you liked the video, make sure to give me a huge thumbs up and give me your thoughts on Moon Knight episode 5 down below. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for all the latest updates. And until next time, guys, stay versed.